In true Souls-like fashion, Lords of the Fallen takes place in a dark fantasy world brimming with magic, gods, and demons. In Mournstead, the fires of the demon lord Adir battle against the radiant light of the judge cleric and Aureus, all while the hungering Umbral stalks everyone from behind the scenes. For each of these factions, the game offers a different conclusion. There are 3 endings: Radiant, Infernal, and Umbral, and in this video, I'm going to explain each one. If you like this type of content, feel free to subscribe to the channel, since I do a lot of it here and most of you watching probably aren't subbed. With that, I'm Mad Luigi, and I hope you enjoy the show. The first ending most players will get is the standard Light or Radiant ending. This requires that you do as you are told and cleanse the 5 beacons. The other endings require more NPC quests and additional steps, and lots of the NPCs are really easy to miss in this game. Yeah, it's a Souls-like alright. So chances are Radiant is most players' first ending. This ending follows the game's most straightforward path of beating the corrupted sentinels guarding each beacon of light, these are the main bosses, and then cleansing the beacons. These pillars are meant to safeguard against Adir's return. Adir is a Dark Lord responsible for the Rogar, all the fire enemies and demons we fight throughout the game. At one point, Adir ruled the world, but he was overthrown and cast into another realm. This all happened at least a millennia ago, and humankind has been governing itself somewhat autonomously ever since. As the opening cinematic shows, the beacons have been corrupted, and Adir is poised to make a return. In response, we are charged with stopping this from happening, and that's exactly what we do in the Radiant ending. By cleansing the 5 beacons, we act in direct opposition to the forces of Adir. This leads us to battle his Rogar army in addition to his followers, such as Damaros the Marked, who becomes a boss fight in this route. We must also fight the 5 corrupted sentinels who stand seemingly to protect the beacons. You would think they would be happy to have us show up to do some cleansing, but since they are corrupted either by Umbral happenings, Adir's influence, some other zombification, or a mix of all the above, they all choose to fight us. And speaking of Adir's influence, it seems that the recent surge in Rogar and the corruption taking place throughout the world is thanks to the rune of Adir. If we follow the quest of the Iron Wayfarer, he reveals that he had the rune of Adir before handing it over to the judge cleric to deal with. He wasn't a man of faith and felt that if anyone was qualified to deal with the rune, it was the judge. Seems like he also didn't want it to be his problem anymore. But he laments that this doomed Mournstead for generations and led to the state we see it in now. The judge was either unable or unwilling to destroy or properly seal the rune, and it corrupted her and the whole kingdom. The item itself comes into play again in the other endings, but this ending doesn't make use of it beyond having it be the catalyst of the current apocalypse. So we continue through the game as normal, until we come to face Adir at its end. We find an imprint of Melchior that shows us he was used by the Rogar to serve as some kind of vessel or conduit for Adir, who we can talk to. Adir offers us a choice, freedom, and what he calls
the truth.
He points out the hypocrisy of the Radiant followers who decry the Umbral but also make use of its power and employ you as their champion, someone who makes use of Umbral through our lamp. But this is the Radiant ending, so we enter the Rogar realm to deal with Adir once and for all. The boss fight is stark in design, but unfortunately it's a bit boring, since you just hunt down zombie mobs marked by Adir, eventually taking out the whole level. Honestly, the focused room and hell setting made it kind of feel like a Doom level to me, and I could imagine having some waves of enemies would have been fun, where you can use the terrain to separate and deal with them so it's not just like a spam fest. But we unfortunately did not get that, just zombies so that we can focus on Adir's speech, which is a warranted design choice, having a mechanically simple level so you can focus on the narrative aspect of Adir, the spectacle, the speech. But I do think it could have been a better experience if there was some mechanical payoff in addition to the narrative payoff. So in this speech, Adir reveals a lot about himself and the lore of the world. He claims to have created and ruled over mankind as a benevolent shepherd, leading with wisdom and love. And for that he was repaid with betrayal. The judges launched a crusade against him, and despite his creation of the Rogar armies, he was beat. Unable to be killed by them, the judges exiled Adir to this prison dimension where he has remained ever since. He mocks how the judges soon themselves became revered as demigods, and how humanity fell into
War, hatred, suffering, chaos.
Adir thinks this proves humanity needs his guidance, and he points out how the other godlike beings of the world, Aureus, the leader of Radiance, and the creature of the Umbral, both hide away, whereas he is open and upfront with us and we can see him. As he nears his death, he gets more controlling, claiming his godhood and creator status deem him worthy of leading, and that we have no right to go against him and destroy him in this way. In the end, the Umbral lamp is able to vaporize and absorb Adir. As the end title notes, it knows no satiation. This also confirms that Adir is in fact a god, so he was being truthful on that account. They go on to say how we, Aureus' champion and Willbringer, are rewarded for our actions. We are annihilated, possibly from the explosion from Adir, or from Aureus viewing us as heresy-tainted from our use of the Umbral lamp. That would confirm some hypocrisy from the Radiant camp. After that, Aureus unleashes his radiance on Axiom with new power, purifying any who transgress his will. In light they fall, and we see this in action in the credit scene. It basically looks like Mornstead is just getting glassed by tactical nukes of Radiance light. There are a lot of beams, and basically everyone has transgressed upon some part of Radiant law at this point. The Judge Cleric herself looks like this after all, so I don't know if anyone will be left after all this cleansing. And we never see Aureus directly, unlike Adir and the Umbral entity known as the Putrid Mother who we see in the Umbral Ending. But this end card and the magic of Radiance seem to confirm him as a real entity, but he is too holy to actually show himself in the events of the game, like Adir says. And we aren't around to see him afterwards since we get atomized too. In judging this ending, we should remember that Aureus' followers turned out to be pretty bad leaders of mankind, engaging in torture and butchering the people of Mornstead. Pieta is pretty cool after being reborn, and she vouched for the average Joe in life, but she was told to can it by the Judge Cleric's abysses. And maybe we can say a lot of that was corruption from the Rune of Adir, but even without that, it seems that there was a lot of deification of the Judge Cleric and the religious order that could have easily led to similar corruption or abuse of power. So with all that and Aureus going pretty ham on the planet right now, the New World is probably in for a rough time of religious persecution and domination once again. This ending is the most normal in the sense that it retains some humankind-centered order, but Aureus seems pretty deceptively dangerous, or he just really lets his followers get swayed by evil influences. Maybe that's okay now that Adir is no more, but the Umbral is still around. Between that and all the cleansing, this ending is definitely an uneasy one at best. But now, let's look at the others to see how this one compares. On the flip side of the Radiant is Adir's ending. You can achieve this one relatively simply as well, but it does allow for a few extra steps. First, we can do Damarose's questline in this ending since she is a follower of Adir. Our interests align this time around. That's thanks to the fact that, in-game, we aren't going to be cleansing any of the beacons. Instead, we just beat each boss and then leave the beacon alone. They have been corrupted by Adir already, so they're working to bring him back to this realm. We don't want to get in the way of that for his ending. So we play through, beat the bosses, grab the rune, and make it to Adir once more. But this time, we are on his side. So instead of lecturing us, he takes his rune and empowers it. And he tells us what to do next. Use the rune to snuff out each beacon and confront the traitor witch Izel, the original name of the Judge Cleric. At each beacon, there is now a new contingent of enemies guarding them, but we beat the sentinels, so some fodder bosses aren't going to stop us, especially when we can just run past them and interact with the beacon. We snuff out each one, and then bring the rune to the defeated Judge Cleric. For context, the remembrance of the Judge Cleric, the Radiant Sentinel, reveals her backstory. It tells us that she was once a warrior priestess of Adir named Izel. One day, she decided she had been living a lie and turned against Adir, swearing to end his rule or die. Obviously, she was successful in this as Adir was defeated and imprisoned. Since then, she has lived as the Judge Cleric, leading humanity. Maybe a time before this recent corruption wasn't so bad with her in charge, before she was corrupted by the rune and became an incarnate of that very same thing she once rose up against. It's possible that before the rune's influence, the world was decent. Some of the in-game characters do seem to fancy the past a bit. Unfortunately, we can't be certain or confirm this. So we take the rune to Izel and enter her mind with it. We are transported to a lush mountaintop. Izel is calm, calls us over, and offers little resistance. I don't think Adir is influencing her here, maybe she just knows she has no way of resisting, but who knows. This imagined world is much more peaceful than the real world of darkness and fire that actually exists outside around the judge. Perhaps she can't bear to see what she has become and uses this to cope, kind of like the facade we see crumble away after her first phase in the boss fight. We hold the rune up to her, and she seems to gladly accept it. Maybe this is actually some part of Adir that has been trapped within Azel all this time. The rune glows, and we eventually wake up in the real world. Adir has taken the body or form of Azel and tells us to rise as his Rogar Lord. We are kneeling in service to our new king and god. The end notes tell that the exile Adir is back in the form of Azel, the one who imprisoned him. Because of the treachery of Azel, his second reign is informed by a rage of betrayal. To me, this clearly reads like he is going to be doing some glassing and cleansing of his own with all his hellfire. The cards also call us his infernal champion, but that we are only the first of his new Rogar Lords. This could be setting up some DLC bosses, as a set of Rogar Lords would be a pretty sensible choice for a gamut of new bosses. But in-world, this signals more Adir destruction and control. The Rogar are pretty liberal with attacking and killing, and Adir is angry, so he's going to be letting them run loose on all those who stand against him and anyone even distantly related. It's hard to trust Adir when he talks about how peaceful and loving he was as a ruler. After all, the theme of Crimson and possibly Fire was present in his past age, as was the existence of warrior priests as confirmed by the Judge-Cleric Remembrance. So there was some warring and fighting happening, and his warriors were to some degree associated with his religion and worship. That's a lot of connection to what he currently looks like. I would assume this Demon Fire Lord was always pretty close to his current self, and his appetite for revenge now that he's back in control spells a bad time for anyone still remaining in Mornstead or probably the rest of the world. So it's hard to say that the first ending was good, but this one almost definitely is not. With that, we have seen the endings of Aureus and Adir. Now let's look at the final primordial being, the Putrid Mother, and its ending of Umbral. The Umbral ending is the most involved and distinct among the three. It consists in many steps unrelated to the beacons, dealing with NPCs, new items, and new areas, and it all starts in the very bottom of the map. Beneath the mines, we come across Harrower Dervla and the Putrid Child. Pieta gives us some information about this kid, noting that it's regrettable to have to lock up a kid, but it must be done to maintain stability against Umbral. Without such a bulwark, the Umbral dimension might be able to encroach on Axiom, beginning its consumption or invasion of the overworld. Pieta notes that there can be value in suffering, which is true, but it's a small justification for the lifetime imprisonment of a child. After finding this area, we can purchase the Scouring Clump from Mulhu. This lets us enter the Mother's Lull in the arena. Once we access the Umbral dimension here, we can properly start the Ending's quest. This mainly consists in getting seed pods from Umbral for specific people, going to those NPCs, and then using the seed pod to absorb their soul or essence. These seed pods note that Umbral is inherently inimical or hostile to the very nature of anyone who steps inside. This gives us a small insight into the blue dimension, that it is by nature opposed to or parasitic to every living thing in Axiom or in general. So next up we seed pod Gerlinda and Damaros, removing them from the world. Then we kill the Light Reaper to reveal an Umbral parasite that Mulhu feels like a failure for having lost control over. It's unclear how the Umbral got infested into the Rogar that Adir specially made, but it makes some sense since it was the one Rogar in charge of hunting down lampbearers, those who bore an Umbral lamp, so there is a connection there. And Mulhu also gives hints towards the ending, saying how Umbral will soon
bloom upon this base reality.
After the Light Reaper, we turn to Umbral and fully commit to the path. The rune of Adir turns withered. It now reveals what anyone with Umbral knowledge apparently knows, that the Putrid Mother is always watching, like some kind of Lovecraftian horror. Then we have another gauntlet of seed pods to use. First, we confront Adir, who is using Melchior's body as a conduit. He says he feels sorry for us that we were led astray by a monster who will consume us. As a last-ditch temptation, he offers us the world, in classic fashion of a Mephistophelian devil. But here, we are followers of the Mother, so we suck him up too. Next on the list is Harkin, also known as the Iron Wayfarer. Harkin is the name of the protagonist of the first Lords of the Fallen from 2014. In the original, he was covered in runes, and when we see the Wayfarer's face, we can see he also has the same runes. Plus, he is likely who is referenced in Sparky's dialogue here.
Another like you roams Mornstead, traveler. A man I encountered long ago. One already burdened then. A burden which has only increased enormously in the years since. And taken a heavy toll. And his is a bleak, ruinous road.
With that, and knowing that this game technically takes place in the same universe as the first game, just thousands of years in the future, it's safe to say that these are the same person. Harkin's parasite describes how he has done great good and appalling evil, and the dark actions he took seem to have finally consumed him. In his questline, we see him give in to despair, wanting to burn Mornstead and all the people in it. But we obviously aren't going along with that, so we defeat him in combat. And here, at the end, beaten and defeated, he accepts his story's conclusion at our hands, through the withered rune of a deer. Finally, we find the last parasite in our very own Pieta. We learn that Malhu tried many times to imbue a mother and her baby with the Umbral, obviously killing all the failed attempts. He succeeded in Pieta and killed her mother since she was of no more use for him. This lines up with how we see Pieta eventually ending up in the orphanage. So we soulflay Pieta and fight Eliane the Starved. After killing the Umbral entity, her remembrance reveals that Pieta acted against the parasite's influence when she acted in service of some bigger purpose like her religion, and when she gave life to others. I think this reveals that the true nature of Umbral is malignant and parasitic. It is a negative, life-sapping force. With this final parasite, we can achieve the ending. Returning to the Umbral dimension, we can directly interact with the Putrid Mother. She offers no words, she just sucks us up. But for Umbral fanatics, this seems to be the goal. Malhu desperately desired to be reunited with the Mother, and the ending title card characterizes our absorption as something positive. We enter her maternal embrace after proving our devotion to her. We learn that what Pieta feared takes place. The barrier against Umbral breaks down, and the blue mukbang dimension encroaches on all other creation. Nothing will be spared, all will be consumed. The Mother seems to be almost a force of nature, something which must feed on anything and everything it possibly can. All creation will now be consumed by this Umbral matriarch. Our path rejected the radiance of Aureus and the fires of a deer, choosing instead to absorb the latter to serve the prime Umbral entity. In this end, we help this force of nature achieve its desire. In doing so, we doom the world to be consumed by her. It sounds to me like everything becomes one in the Putrid Mother. That's the only logical conclusion to her feeding on everything. This is kind of like Elden Ring's Frenzied Flame ending, where all is burned to become a singular one great. Everything in Mornstead and Axiom and every other land is absorbed into the Mother here. It all becomes one in her. In judgment, I would say an end to all existence via the Putrid Mother's plate seems like a pretty hopeless conclusion, which is about par for the course when we see the effect Umbral has on those who are exposed to it, other than us, I guess.
A tangle of wet meat is undone by her majestic beauty!
With the 3 achievement-earning endings of Lords of the Fallen explained, we should now have a clearer picture about what each one entails. Honestly, none of them seem to be very good. The only one our character even survives is one where we become a lieutenant to the devil. In contrast, Elden Ring's endings seem positively hopeful, which is really saying something given how overall depressing those endings really are. So those are the conclusions to the story of Lords of the Fallen. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, feel free to subscribe to the channel or support me on Patreon. Thanks to my patrons who do support, and thank you for watching. I'm Mad Luigi, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.